His name was Marcus. He had 3 months of freeze-dried food, a farty cage full of electronics, 4 rifles, 2,000 rounds of ammunition, and a binder color-coded, laminated, that mapped out every contingency he could imagine. He died on day 31, not from a gunfight, not from starvation, not from raiders or disease or dehydration. He died because he ran out of his blood pressure medication. A medication he had thrown away 3 separate times during gear rotation cycles. Because it was expired. Because he thought expired meant useless. The bottle was recovered 6 weeks later. By someone who knew better. I've studied collapse. Not the Hollywood version, not the video game version. The real version. The documented, archived, survivor testimony version, where the most dangerous people weren't the ones who had nothing. They were the ones who were certain they had everything. I call myself a trash panda observer, not because it's funny, because it's accurate. Raccoons don't prepare for a single scenario. They don't stockpile according to one ideology. They move through the ruins of what others built, find what others dismissed, and they survive when everything else retreats or dies. That is the only survival philosophy that history has consistently validated. Today, we are going through 9 items, 9 categories of material that trained, equipped, confident preppers have routinely discarded, abandoned, or never valued in the first place. And in documented collapses, Bosnia, Argentina, the Soviet dissolution, post-Katrina New Orleans, the Syrian civil war, those same items became the difference between survival and death. Not sometimes, consistently. Stay with me to the end. Because item number 1 is the one most people will immediately disagree with. And item number 9 is the one that will keep you awake tonight. Before we get into the list, you need to understand something about collapse psychology. There's a pattern that repeats across every documented societal breakdown. The people who prepare the most, in the conventional sense, tend to prepare for a single cinematic scenario. The total grid-down event, the invasion, the societal overnight collapse. And because they prepare for that one picture in their head, they optimize ruthlessly for it. They throw away anything that doesn't fit the frame. In Sarajevo during the 1992 to 1995 siege, a city of nearly 400,000 people was sealed inside a kill zone for nearly 4 years. Not weeks, years. The people who survived the longest weren't the ones with the most ammunition. They were the ones who could repair things, trade things, improvise things. Who had retained, sometimes accidentally, the kind of materials that the tactically minded had already discarded. Fernando Ferfeal Aguirre documented the 2001 Argentine economic collapse in extraordinary detail. He watched neighbors with elaborate survival setups collapse socially, economically, and psychologically, while others with far fewer tactical resources adapted and endured. The difference, over and over, was not firepower, it was resourcefulness. It was the trash panda mentality before anyone called it that. Keep that in mind as we go through these 9 things. The LIST countdown from 9 to 1. Number 9. Expired medication we opened with Marcus. Let's stay there for a moment. The prepper community has a complicated relationship with pharmaceuticals. Many preppers do stockpile medication. That's smart. But they also rotate aggressively, discarding anything past the printed expiration date. Here's what they're not telling you. The expiration date on a medication bottle is a liability date, not a death date. The U.S. military conducted the largest long-term drug stability study in history, the SLEP program, Shelf Life Extension Program, and found that the vast majority of medications retain 90% or more of their potency decades past their printed expiration dates when stored properly. Decades. In the Sarajevo siege, pharmacies were stripped bare within weeks. Survivors who had kept old, expired medication in their homes, the stuff they'd been meaning to throw away, suddenly had something of extraordinary value. Not just for personal use, for barter, for social leverage, for purchasing protection. The trash panda doesn't throw away a pill bottle because the date says it should be gone. The trash panda asks, what is this actually worth, and to whom, when the pharmacy no longer exists? Lesson. Rotate your knowledge before you rotate your supplies. Understand what you're discarding. An expired blood pressure medication that still works at 80% efficacy is not waste. In a collapse, it is currency. Number 8. Broken or outdated tools in 2005. After Hurricane Katrina flooded New Orleans, FEMA's response collapsed under its own bureaucratic weight. People were waiting and waiting and waiting. The individuals who moved fastest, who helped their communities most effectively, were not the ones with the newest gear. They were the ones who could fix things. A hand drill with a cracked handle still drills. A saw with a bent blade still cuts. A manual can opener from 1987 still opens cans. The prepper mindset, particularly the gear acquisition prepper, tends toward a kind of perfectionism. If it's broken, it gets discarded. If it's outdated, it gets sold. If it doesn't meet the standard of the current build, it leaves the inventory. What leaves the inventory goes to the thrift store. What goes to the thrift store gets purchased by someone who doesn't know they just bought something vital, or it ends up in a dumpster, or a landfill. In post-Soviet Russia during the economic unraveling of the early 1990s, repair culture, remont, became central to daily survival. People repaired appliances, tools, clothing, furniture, everything, not because they were nostalgic. Because replacement was either impossible or unaffordable. The person who had retained their grandfather's hand tools, their broken but repairable equipment, their outdated but functional devices, that person became essential to their community. Essentiality is protection. It's a form of survival that bullets cannot replicate. Lesson: a broken tool is not a disposed tool. It's a repair project. In collapse, the ability to fix anything, combined with functional, even imperfect tools, is social capital of the highest order. Number 7. Urban foraging knowledge and the plants preppers walk past. Most preppers have seeds. That's good, long-term thinking. But here's the gap most of them never close. They have seeds but no foraging knowledge. They're planning for a garden that takes months to mature, while walking past calories every single day. Every single day. Dandelions, plantain, lamb's quarters. Wood sorrel, purslane, cattail. These are not exotic wilderness plants. These are the plants that grow in the cracks of sidewalks, in vacant lots, in the margins of suburban streets, and preppers pull them out of their gardens as weeds. In the Syrian conflict zones around Aleppo, NGO workers documented communities surviving partial food blockades by harvesting wild plants from rubble zones that the residents had always considered worthless, even invasive. The knowledge wasn't tactical. It wasn't dramatic. It was botanical. And it kept people alive during gaps when stored food ran out and supply lines were severed. The trash panda already knows this. The raccoon doesn't reject food because it wasn't in the plan. Lesson: the most overlooked survival resource isn't a piece of gear. It's botanical literacy. Know what grows within 2 miles of your location. What is edible? What treats what? The urban landscape is not a wasteland. It's an untouched pantry for those who learn the language. Number 6. Social fabric. The network preppers abandoned to bug out. This one isn't physical, but it may be the most important item on this list. Across virtually every documented long-term collapse, the single greatest predictor of individual survival was not stockpile size, not tactical training, not location. It was community embeddedness. Who knew you, who you had helped, who had a reason to protect you. The prepper ethos, in many of its more extreme expressions, pulls in the exact opposite direction. Trust no one. Don't tell anyone what you have. Bug out alone. Your neighbors are a threat. This ideology sounds strategically sound. It is historically catastrophic. In the Bosnian siege, Kenan Trebincevic, who survived and later documented his experience, described watching neighbors who had isolated themselves, who had trusted no one, who had prepared privately and completely, die not from lack of supplies, but from lack of a single person who would take a risk for them. One person, one relationship. One moment of someone saying, "I'll help you because you helped me." The preppers who abandoned their neighborhoods, who cut social ties in the name of operational security, who rejected the liability of community. They threw away the single most valuable survival asset that exists, and they threw it away before the collapse. Sometimes for years, deliberately. Lesson: your network is your survival infrastructure. The relationships you dismiss as liabilities before the collapse are the only things that can save you during it. A neighbor who trusts you is worth more than another rifle. Number 5. Paper maps, physical books, and analog records. The digital prepper is everywhere now. External hard drives loaded with survival manuals. Tablets full of PDFs. Laptops with offline Wikipedia. All of it EMP-proofed in theory. All of it dependent on a working device. All of it worthless when the battery dies with no way to charge it. And here's the quiet truth that gets buried under the excitement of digital preparedness. Paper is more durable than any electronic device ever manufactured. In the Soviet collapse, libraries, actual physical libraries, became community survival centers. Medical texts, agricultural manuals, engineering guides. Books that had been considered low value in a digital world suddenly became the primary reference infrastructure for communities trying to rebuild basic systems. The books weren't tactical, they were practical. And the preppers who had sold their physical books at garage sales, who had donated their father's field guides and medical references, who had replaced everything analog with something electronic, discovered that a Kindle with a dead battery is not a book. Paper maps, in particular, are almost universally absent from modern prepper kits. GPS is assumed. Cell towers are assumed. But both require infrastructure. The trash panda trusts paper. Paper doesn't need a signal. Lesson: your analog library is not clutter. It is a survival database that operates in every collapse scenario, without exception. Every practical reference you discard to save shelf space is a gap in your community's post-collapse knowledge base. Number 4. Children's clothing and basic textiles. This one surprises people. But not the people who have studied Argentina 2001. Furfael documented something remarkable in the months following Argentina's economic implosion. Certain items became barter currency almost immediately, not just food. Not just ammunition, socks, underwear, children's shoes in multiple sizes, fabric, thread, needles. Prepper community, overwhelmingly, does not account for textile infrastructure. They keep their current size of clothing and nothing else. They donate what their children outgrow. They discard worn items without a second thought. They buy synthetic tactical gear and throw away durable natural fabrics. In a collapse that lasts longer than a season, and most documented collapses do, clothing becomes a critical resource. Children grow. Adults lose weight. Fabric degrades faster than most people expect under survival conditions. In post-Katrina communities, people who had stored basic sewing supplies and extra clothing in varying sizes found themselves with immediate high-value barter goods. Not because socks are glamorous, because socks are necessary. And at some point, every family runs out of them. Lesson: the textile stack is the invisible supply chain. Every piece of fabric you donate instead of store. Every outgrown child's shoe you discard. Every sewing kit you consider redundant is a potential barter chip, a community asset, a survival resource that almost no one is preserving. We need to talk about tactical appearance. The prepper community has an aesthetic. Plate carriers, multicam, maul-laden backpacks, tactical boots, aggressive silhouettes. In a grit-down fantasy scenario, this signals capability. In an actual collapse, historically documented, survivor confirmed, it signals target. In the Bosnian siege, foreign journalists and aid workers learned quickly that military-style dress made them targets for every faction simultaneously. Locals who survived the streets wore nondescript civilian clothing. They moved without announcing themselves. They were unremarkable, invisible. The gray man principle is not new. But it conflicts violently with a prepper culture that has, in many cases, become an identity, a visible, tactical, gear-forward identity. And so the clothing that gets discarded? The plain hoodie, the worn jeans, the nondescript backpack, the ordinary shoes. These are the items that keep you invisible when visibility means death. The trash panda moves through the darkness without announcing itself. That is not weakness. That is the most sophisticated tactical principle in the entire history of urban survival. Lesson: the gear that makes you feel prepared may be the gear that gets you killed. Ordinariness is armor. Blend in or become a target. There is no third option in a populated collapse zone. Number 2. Human skills without equipment dependencies. Here is where most survival planning silently fails. The prepper community excels at acquiring tools. It struggles deeply with acquiring skills that work without the tools. Can you start a fire without a lighter? Most can't. Can you navigate without GPS? Most can't. Can you purify water without a filter? Can you dress a wound without a trauma kit? Can you preserve food without electricity? The gear is real. The gear is valuable, but gear breaks. Gear runs out. Gear gets stolen. Skills cannot be taken from you. In every long-term collapse, and I want you to hold this thought because it applies to item number 1, the people who survived the longest were not the people with the most equipment. They were the people with embedded, physical, practice-hardened skills: blacksmithing, basic surgery, animal husbandry, fermentation, construction, electrical repair. Not theoretical knowledge, not a PDF. Physical, embodied, practice skill. The skills that get discarded, traded for more gear, more storage, more tactical training are the most valuable things a person can possess, because a person with skills is irreplaceable. A person with gear is just a moving supply cache. Pause. Shift in tone, slower. And now. Number 1. I want you to prepare yourself, because this is not a comfortable observation. Number 1. The will to be uncomfortable. Every other item on this list can be found, recovered, and used. This one cannot. It has to have been built long before the collapse arrives. Across every survival account I have studied, Sarajevo, Leningrad, post-Katrina New Orleans, the Syrian displacement corridor, the Argentine economic spiral, the Soviet collapse, every single one, there is a category of person who did not survive. Not because they lacked supplies. Not because they lacked knowledge. Not because they were outgunned or outmaneuvered. They did not survive because they could not tolerate discomfort, cold, hunger, uncertainty, loss of status, loss of control. The slow grinding psychological erosion of a world that refuses to return to normal. The prepper community, and I say this with full respect for the genuine preparation that exists within it, has in many cases created the most comfortable version of survival imaginable. Climate-controlled storage rooms, backup generators, hot showers through propane systems, elaborate redundancies designed to maintain quality of life. These are not wrong. These are intelligent. But they can also become a psychological dependency, because the human mind adapts to its baseline. And if your baseline is comfort, if every system you've built is designed to prevent discomfort rather than prepare you to endure it, then the moment those systems fail, you will be psychologically unprepared for what survival actually feels like, what it smells like, what it tastes like. The boredom, the fear, the long nights with no certainty that the morning will be better. Viktor Frankl survived Auschwitz. He survived because his psychological architecture had room for suffering. Not because he welcomed it. Because he had developed the capacity to hold it without breaking. Deliberately uncomfortable experiences, cold exposure, extended fasting, physical hardship, navigating difficult social situations, voluntarily lowering your standard of living for extended periods. These are the items that preppers most consistently throw away, not physical items. The willingness to practice discomfort. The discipline to make your body and mind familiar with conditions you hope never arrive. The trash panda lives in the cold. The trash panda eats what's available. The trash panda moves through hostile environments at night and does not expect them to become comfortable. That is the final, deepest form of preparation, and it costs nothing, and almost no one does it. The dangerous rule, near-end reveal. Tone, quieter, more deliberate. Now I need to tell you something that most survival channels will not say. There is a dangerous rule that emerges from every long-term collapse study. It is not dangerous because it's wrong. It is dangerous because it is right, and because acting on it requires you to abandon almost everything the prepper community teaches. The rule is this: in a prolonged collapse, the person who is known to have too much becomes the target. The person who is known to have just enough, and to be generous with it, becomes the protected. This runs against every hoarding instinct, every OPSEC principle, every self-preservation reflex. But the historical record is unambiguous. In Sarajevo, neighbors who shared what little they had, carefully, strategically, not out of naivety but out of calculated social investment, built protection networks that no amount of firepower could replicate. The person behind triple-locked doors with 6 months of food, who trusted no one and shared nothing. They became a target the moment someone knew what they had. And someone always knows. The dangerous truth of collapse is that isolation is not protection. It is a slow siege. Being embedded in a community, being the person people would fight for, the person whose absence would be noticed and mourned. That is the only form of security that scales across every phase of collapse. Not the early phase. Not the middle phase. Every phase. Including the ones that last years. Closing, calm, and powerful. Ambient sound fades almost completely. The items on this list are not glamorous. They will not trend on gear forums. They will not fill an Amazon cart. They will not look impressive in a YouTube thumbnail. But they are what the survivors kept. Or what they wish they had kept. Or what the ones who didn't survive had thrown away. I study collapse not because I want it to happen. I study it because the pattern repeats, and the pattern shows with quiet, disturbing consistency that the people who die are rarely the ones who are unprepared. They are the ones who are prepared for the wrong scenario, confident in a plan that the actual collapse never read, certain of an enemy that never arrived, while the real threat came from the thing they dismissed, the item they discarded, the network they abandoned, the discomfort they refused to practice. I move through the ruins of other people's certainty. I pick up what they threw away and I learn. The collapse doesn't kill the unprepared. It kills the overconfident. Silence. End card optional narrator outro. If this found you at the right time, if something in here landed differently than you expected, share it with the one person in your life who's still willing to question their assumptions. Not the loudest person in your group, the quietest. They're usually the most dangerous to overlook. I'll see you in the next one.